Hello everybody, my name is Fern Hames. I'm the director at the Rylah Institute and delighted to be hosting today's seminar and welcoming you all to join into the fabulous seminar we've got coming up today. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and any elders from other communities that might be here with us today. Today we have two speakers. You can see them on the screen there. We've got Kate Lee, who's with us at ARI, and Kate's going to talk about nature in cities. She's also going to tell you a little bit about our Victorians Value Nature program that we're really proud of at ARI. We're also going to hear from Rose Macaulay, who's going to talk about a whole lot of different dimensions on connections with nature. And I've seen a little bit of a sneak preview of what both of these women are going to speak about, and I'm so looking forward to this. Because they have kind of similar content, we're going to hold questions after Kate's until the end. We'll do all the questions together at the end. So we'll run through Kate's, we'll jump straight to Rose's, and then we'll jump into questions, and Andy will help us through those. So let's get started. That's enough for me. Over to you, Kate. Looking forward to this seminar. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Fern, and wonderful to be with you all today. Yeah, my name is Dr. Kate Lee, and I am the team leader for the Victorians Valuing Nature program, as Fern's mentioned. Focusing on supporting and leading Victorians towards a nature state. So I have a background in teaching and research in the around people and nature relationships, and in particular around social and psychological dimensions. And this has been through my role in the School of Ecosystem and Forest Sciences at the University of Melbourne, where I was a member of the Environmental Social Science and the Green Infrastructure research groups. And so in my time researching and teaching in this space, I've had the extreme privilege of working with some fantastic people, both inside academia and beyond in government and industry, and across different disciplines. So for example, in ecology, engineering, psychology, and business. So I've also worked in the Clean Air and Urban Landscapes Hub, and am currently collaborating with an international group of researchers exploring people-nature connections over 5 countries around the world. So my plan for today, I think I've given it all the way up front, is to talk around people and nature in cities. And as Fern's alluded to, talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing in this space, and also to talk about the Victorians Valuing Nature program. So I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people and acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. So cities play a unique role in today's world. They provide opportunities for employment, education, health and culture. But cities continue to expand at unprecedented rates, and at the same time, so does the pressure that they put on natural resources, ecosystems, and the climate. Alongside this, urbanisation is linked with decreased access to nature, particularly in deprived urban areas. In recent years, there's been a real focus towards exploring nature contact and experiences in the natural environment as potentially providing health and well-being for communities. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that there are a range of other social and environmental determinants besides urbanisation that are really important for health and well-being. So these can include demographic, social, and physical shifts, for example, towards an ageing population, increases in stress and loneliness, and more sedentary lifestyles. So in general, research has shown that nature experience is associated with mental health benefits in many different ways, and the confluence of results from experimental and correlational studies is encouraging. So there's now a mounting body of evidence from experimental studies that nature exposure plays a causal role, at least in the short term, but less well established is whether this plays out in influencing longer term mental health. So researchers have explored psychological and physiological markers associated with stress around images and sounds of nature, looked at group changes in affective, cognitive and physiological markers associated with, for example, walking in nature versus urban environments, and also explored well-being and other health outcomes in populations and linking them with nature proximity. When I talk about health here, we can think of the World Health Organization definition of health as a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. For mental well-being, the psychological, cognitive and emotional quality of a person's life, which includes the thoughts and feelings that individuals have about the state of their life and their experience of happiness. Of course, in recent years, the role of nature for people in cities has become particularly prevalent, with research articles and popular media talking about the ways that people are flocking to and experiencing nature, where nature in cities has become a source of comfort, escape and well-being for many people around the globe, to buffer the detrimental effects of social isolation and increased stress and anxiety associated with the pandemic and with lockdowns. In recognition of urbanisation and the effects of climate change and the benefits of nature, cities and governments globally are focusing on building in high quality access to green spaces in city. For example, places like Singapore have transformed from a garden in a city in a garden, and then towards a city in nature. At a different level, if anyone went and saw the NGV exhibition in 2020, Planet City was a thought experiment which explored developing just one city to house the projected population of the globe in 2050. So that's 10 billion people just in one city. And the focus of that was around housing people in one city and enabling the rest of the globe to heal. This exhibition was inspired by global initiatives such as the Half Earth Project, and also consistent with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which all call on people around the world to protect significant portions of the land and the sea to manage the habitat and ensure the long-term health of the planet. So now I'm going to do something a little different, and I'm hoping that you'll come with me on this journey. So I want you to imagine your own city vision. So you're waking up 15 years from today in the year 2037. You get ready and decide to head out and explore the city, and you emerge out and are struck by the view. It is striking and unique and replete with flourishing nature. So draw on your specific expertise to ground your vision in what you feel is genuinely possible. So I'm going to be a bit ambitious here and say, in the next 30 seconds, can you try and picture it and experience it in as much detail as possible? So what is your first impression? What is the first thing that you see, hear, smell, and feel? What do you notice that makes it remarkable? How are people nearby engaging and experiencing it? So I know that was a lot to try and pack into just 30 seconds, but hopefully at least it was, you know, a thought-provoking. And so I know that we're all likely here today because we've got this shared understanding of the role of nature for our future cities and for our future generations. And I'm sure that many aspects of these visions differ, but that there are likely points at which they converge. So in my past work and that of others, I've heard comments about blurring distinctions between people and nature, having nature close by and accessible, seeing people delighting in their experiences, and of people engaging with different types of nature in quite different ways. So it was a question very much like this one that led colleagues and I at the University of Melbourne and the University of New South Wales Business School to running a series of summits. And these were run across Sydney and Melbourne, and with over 60 contributors from industry, government, academia and the community. They were built on a theory of collective change from organisational development, which was designed to help to create a new lens for seeing issues so that people have a new way to think about and discuss things. And this is particularly important in diverse sectors where complex collaborations and interdisciplinary collaborations or transdisciplinary collaborations are essential for creating change. So this kind of approach has been used in organisations and more broadly, for example, internationally in cities seeking to create these green transformations. So this process is built around uncovering best practice examples of what currently exists, looking forward into the future for how that might develop, thinking for potential opportunities to leverage or barriers that might stand in the way and how to overcome these, and then thinking quite concretely about milestones and steps to enact change. So for this, we developed and released a roadmap for the industry and was highlighting different impacts for learning and collaboration to progress the sector. So for example, talking about the importance of government leading in these partnerships with having bodies in there to advocate for change and to develop expertise and capacity in the sector, and the importance of creating this co-leading approach for alignment and building sector capacity and knowledge. So in my vision of a future city, and I'm sure for many others, at least if images and stories and media are anything to go by, nature is integrated into the built fabric of the city. So it moves beyond the street level and beyond parks to encasing and surrounding us from nearby roofs and walls in unexpected and surprising places. So green roofs, for example, are one form of this greenery and are dramatically increasing in number around the world. Green roofs are highly engineered and designed landscapes often these days, and so they can look quite different. And that's particularly true here in Australia with our hot, dry climate, which means that our plant palette is significantly different. And so for this reason, it's been important to develop the evidence base for green roofs and also the local evidence base here in Australia. So as part of this work that I and colleagues at the University of Melbourne and University of New South Wales have undertaken has been designed to explore the kinds of designs and plants on green roofs that people most appreciate, to understand how people are experiencing these places, and to understand the kind of support that they might provide for people who are living and working in cities. So the first study that I'll talk about was a survey that we did with hundreds of workers here in Melbourne, where we asked them what kind of green roof they would most like to see from their windows. So we had different kinds of vegetation options for things that were feasible and were being used on green roofs here in Australia. So this ranged all the way from low-growing succulents through to taller and bright flowering grasses. And this one turned out to be the most preferred. In addition, we also observed that those with a higher connection to nature seem to distinguish more between preferences for taller vegetation and lower. And this could potentially reflect preferences for more naturalistic vegetation and an ecological aesthetic. We then extended this to experiments and field experiments, exploring breaks spent with views to flowering grassy green roofs and comparing those to views without, and exploring outcomes for wellbeing and performance with groups of students. We explored wellbeing and performance with a neuropsychology task in the laboratory and with a work performance task and self-reported effort and tension in the field. So together this work suggests that green roof city views may help to provide supportive breaks, assisting with concentration and effort that's needed to invest in work. It may also help to reduce feelings of tension and to help people perform better at work, at least in the short term. We've also recently conducted interviews with people after virtual visits to different green roofs in Melbourne, and this was led by our student Belinda Wiley. And so this work was really designed to explore how people experience and engage with green roofs and what that might mean for their experience living and working in cities. And so this work has highlighted the importance to interact, of opportunities to interact with the green roof and to experience the space and the different elements in that space, including the vegetation. And it's also highlighted that things beyond the green roof might be really important too. So the height and the distance from the hustle and bustle of the city seem to matter, as well as providing a unique view out onto the sky, the horizons, and the surrounding city that seems to be quite distinct and important. So we have then built on and extended this research, building it into a design framework for psychological wellbeing for green roofs. And this was led by Professor Kath Williams at the University of Melbourne. And so this framework links the work that we've done with the emerging international literature and also with the broader socio-ecological and human environment interaction models. And so that is to think about green roof experiences more broadly in our social context and in the context of our daily lives. And so this framework links qualities of the physical environment, such as the vegetation characteristics, but also alongside other factors that recognise the role of supportive activities on the green roof. So, for example, socialising with others, going for a walk. Alongside personal autonomy in designing and using these spaces and being able to flexibly adapt them to what you want to do, as well as different forms of engagement and access, and the norms for being able to go out and use these spaces. So while we've particularly focused on this around green roof design, it's also applicable to green spaces more broadly. And building on this and incorporating the research that we've done is a 10-year State of Knowledge in Australia paper, which was led by Professor Nick Williams and featured in a special issue for nature-based solutions for changing urban landscapes in Australia. And this paper highlights both the growth in the number of green roofs that are being built and also integrates across diverse research agendas, exploring across green roof construction, plant pellets, substrates, as well as a range of social, environmental and building outcomes. So more broadly, the World Economic Forum highlights that a nature positive pathway in the infrastructure and built environment could create over 3 trillion in business opportunities and create 117 million jobs by 2030. But conversely, for the first time, the top 5 global risks come from a single category, the environment, which includes biodiversity loss as one of the top risks in the coming 10 years. And worryingly, over half the world's total GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature and its services and exposed to risks from nature loss. So this highlights that we need global action to engage our population around the world in connecting and acting for protecting the natural environment and halting its ongoing decline. This requires changes across entire systems, new technologies, different policies, shifts in corporate behaviour, energetic citizen action, new coalitions, and new ways of thinking about the future. It also requires significant funding and support. Globally, there are large funds such as the Bezos Earth Fund, founded by the Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, which has pledged significant resources in the coming decade for grants to leverage innovation and to catalyse further funds. But according to the United Nations Environment Programme, total global investment in nature will need to nearly quadruple by 2050 to 8.1 trillion. So this clearly needs partnerships and actions and putting nature at the heart of our lives to inspire and maintain collective impact and effort across citizens and governments worldwide. Fully realising this vision requires embracing all voices. And according to the International Union of Conservation of Nature, it should explicitly include Indigenous peoples, local communities, regional and city governments, the private sector, NGOs, women, youth, and society at large. But despite deep ecological knowledge, Indigenous people have often been marginalised from the decision-making about urban environments. But as University of Melbourne and ARI postdoc researcher Maddie Miller says, the future of our cities is Indigenous. And so increasingly the vital contribution of Indigenous local knowledges to building climate resilient cities that respond to their unique environments is being acknowledged. And so this area of partnerships, collaborations, and involving all voices at the table is a real focus for the Victorians Valuing Nature program. So again, this is seeking to support us collectively working towards our vision of Victoria as a nature state, focusing on research engagement and collective impact to get there. So I'll talk briefly about a few of the different projects, engaging with Victorians and progressing towards our 20-year plan, Protecting Victoria's Environment for Biodiversity 2037. So this strategy has 2 goals. The first, that we improve nature, and the second, that more Victorians connect with and act for nature. And so we're focused on connecting all Victorians with nature and supporting 5 million Victorians acting to protect nature. So the VVN program is being driven by a fantastic team who are focused on leading these different projects, particularly around engaging with stakeholders, partners, and the community, developing interventions on the ground, evaluating and measuring impact, communicating and making visible the work that's being done, recognising multiple ways of knowing, and identifying priority behaviours for people acting for the environment and the policy supports making that happen. In particular, the group is focused around developing the local evidence base and measuring impact over time. So the Victorian Nature Festival is our flagship collective impact and engagement event, and it's been run over the past 2 years with a report on this coming out shortly. The focus of the festival is around co-creation and traditional owner leadership in caring for country. It builds materials and activities for connecting and supporting people to act for nature, and is also a dynamic space for research. So, for example, last year, our postdoc researcher, Lily Van Eden, was testing the effectiveness of different forms of messaging during and 3 months after people taking part in the festival. The next project is the Victorians Valuing Nature State Survey. This is an annual survey that's conducted with a representative sample of thousands of Victorians and focuses on connection, values, experiences in nature, biodiversity knowledge, and behaviours that people are doing for nature. Importantly, this survey has been run since 2018, and so there's a potential there for it providing a long-term picture of people connecting with and acting for nature. And so we hope to continue running this survey annually, and that it can help us to provide a robust longitudinal data set here in Victoria. We also have a measurement and evaluation platform, which is designed to track our collective progress and help to measure connecting and acting with nature. So we've developed a scale measuring connection with nature, and this was led by Melissa Hattie. And this scale assesses personal identity, experience, and worldview, and is linked with environmental and altruistic values, time spent in nature, and pro-environmental behaviours. Part of the measurement and evaluation platform is around assessing changes in nature connection across programs and interventions, and it's publicly available for use and sits alongside other indicators that are critical for the Biodiversity 2037 strategy. So that was just a quick overview of the different projects that we're progressing and that are helping us towards this goal of Victorians valuing nature, where all Victorians are connecting with nature and 5 million Victorians are acting to protect nature. So to finish, I would like you to imagine that it's tomorrow morning and you're stepping out from your door. I want you to think about what you see and feel, and what you notice about any surrounding nature and how people are experiencing it. I want you to think about how or if this differs from the future you created earlier of a flourishing city-state and nature that was remarkable and striking. And I would also ask, what is one simple and immediate step that you can take towards bridging that difference? So thank you very much, everyone. Once again, my name is Kate Lee, and I'm in the Victorians Valuing Nature program. If you would like more information, please feel free to get in touch. I also include some additional citations for further reading if you're interested. Thank you.
I can hear you applauding, and hopefully others. That echo thing again. All around the place. Thank you so much, Kate. That was terrific. Thank you so much. I'm thinking about, you know, the opportunities if everybody put nature at the heart of our lives, and all wondering about all the different imagined cities that are being imagined everywhere now. I do feel grateful, privileged even, that at ARI we do have a relatively green space environment to work in. It's a really wonderful thing to walk through the trees, to come in the front door, and indeed there's been many times we've had meetings in the conference room where we've had to close the windows because you can't hear what people are saying over the bird song. That's a really good problem to have. That was terrific. Let's shift now to hearing from Rose. And I'm really intrigued to hear some of the things she's going to tell us about using a multisensory approach and mindfulness and how we can connect with nature in meaningful ways. Thanks so much, Rose. Over to you. And we'll hold Kate's questions till the end. Thanks to those who've sent some in. Thanks, Rose.
Thanks very much, Fern. And it's wonderful to be here and have this opportunity to speak with everyone today. I think my mic's unmuted now, seeing out if it's not. So yeah, thanks very much for that introduction, and to Kate for kind of setting this scene of people in nature in our cities. Today I'm going to be diving into a couple of those concepts that Kate has mentioned today, of connection with nature and how individuals engage with nature. And I'm going to be talking about engagement through sensory and cognitive connections with nature, and in interactions in nature experiences. I'm going to discuss why this matters, why does engagement matter to understand, and I'm going to apply this discussion in particular to urban settings and nature in cities. So as I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I'm working from and meeting from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I acknowledge their continuing connections to these lands and to country. So the findings and the outcomes that I talk through today are based off my PhD studies that I'm currently working on. So I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne. Kate Lee is one of my PhD supervisors, along with Catherine Williams and Catherine Johnson at the University of Melbourne. So I'm going to be presenting a bit of an overview of key and relevant findings from my PhD that I think have some good practical implications and recommendations that we can take away today. Okay, so engagement in nature, what is it? When I'm talking about engagement in nature, I'm talking about a really broad range of experiences in nature, and these include cognitive, emotional and sensory connections and interactions in nature experiences in the moment of being in or with nature. So engagement really allows a closer look at the individual experience of nature. What are individuals paying attention to? How do they feel and think about nature or when they're in nature? And what sensory interactions are common and important in nature? And it's important to understand how individuals are engaging with nature, because engagement is really relevant and important for some key wellbeing outcomes of nature experiences, including connection with nature and also psychological restoration. So nature connection and restoration are really important for human health and well-being, but they're also really important for our environmental health and how we and how much we care for the environment. So these outcomes and engagement's role in them are particularly important, I think, in an urban context. Firstly, because most of the urban population, or global population, sorry, now live in cities or in urban environments, but access to and quality of really immersive nature experiences is somewhat limited in these places. And second, connecting urban populations to nature is a really critical part of sustainable development and health outcomes. But there's still a little bit of a way to go to really understand how connections with nature are actually formed. And I'm looking at this through the lens of engagement during the nature experience. So in that moment of being with nature, what does forming a connection with nature actually look like or feel like? And then how can we use that understanding to strengthen connection with nature? So some researchers are exploring strategies to do this, to heighten engagement with nature, and then in an effort to strengthen these outcomes of connection with nature and restoration and other outcomes. So some examples include mindfulness in nature, increasing a sensory awareness in nature, and other researchers and strategies use more abstract ways to evoke imagination in nature, or thinking about meaningful relationships or perceptions between people and nature. As I was looking through this literature and the existing strategies, it was clear that there are quite a few tools available to heighten engagement. but not much knowledge or guidelines around as to which tools or interventions might be the most useful in different contexts or for specific outcomes, and of course for specific people or different populations that are being targeted. So one of my research aims was to contrast some of these engagement strategies and test them and examine which were relevant to different outcomes. And I have an asterisk next to mindfulness there, because mindfulness as a form of engagement in nature was a focus, or is a focus, of my research. Mindfulness has been examined in a few areas of the literature on nature experiences, and in my PhD I draw on mindfulness as a framework to actually understand other forms of engagement as well. So some of that framing will be evident as I talk through the approaches and the outcomes of my research today. Okay, so in line with that aim of examining different types of engagement with nature and examining how forms of engagement are related to the different benefits of nature, I conducted two separate studies in my PhD. So first, I interviewed people who had spent a work break in an urban green space, and I asked those people how were they engaging during their experience. So what were they paying attention to? What were they actually doing and thinking and feeling during their experience? And then in the analysis, I asked how those forms of engagement related to outcomes like psychological restoration and nature connection, and kind of looked at those connections or pathways there. In the second study, I drew on some of the outcomes of the first interview study to design a nature-based engagement intervention, where we randomly allocated people to one of four groups. So 3 groups received instructions during a short nature experience about how to engage with that experience, and then 1 group was unguided. They didn't have any instructions that they received. The engagement groups, so they had exercises that were delivered on their phone during a nature break, and the groups had different instructions, so they differed. So the questions I asked in this study were, do instructions or interventions that are designed to enhance awareness of nature lead to higher connection and restoration? And if so, how? What were the differences between groups and what was kind of underpinning that? So today I'll talk about some broad outcomes from these studies by selecting some key discussion points that I think are most relevant and practical. And those are, I have 3 broad points that I want to talk through today. So first, I'll share with you the forms of engagement that we identified that connect to restoration and nature connection. And second, I'll talk about an interesting finding that some engagement interventions may actually be too effortful or disruptive to be beneficial for certain outcomes. And then third, I'll discuss the pathways or the mechanisms that might link mindfulness to the experience of nature and the insights that we have from those findings. All right, so this first discussion point or outcome was that we identified a few key forms of engagement through the interview study that I conducted, but also in reviewing the literature of existing studies in this area. And so first we started with mindful engagement, and a few interviewees in that study expressed intentionally bringing in a form of mindfulness to their nature experience. And this was without me telling them about the aims or my specific interest in this form of engagement. That was how they chose to spend time during their nature break. And mindfulness in this context was particularly connected to having a higher level of contact or connection with nature during that experience, and also a sense of calmness in that experience. Sensory engagement in nature was also was really commonly reported. So it was probably the form of engagement that was most often talked about by interviewees. So having this greater awareness of the sensory experience, that might have been feeling the grass beneath them as they sat down or walked around, or feeling the weather and the rain or the wind on their skin. So it was really this embodied experience of nature or being in the outdoors. And although sensory engagement is an aspect of mindfulness, we've treated it separately here, because some individuals that were engaging in sway weren't necessarily bringing that whole mindful awareness to their experience. This form of engagement, sensory engagement, was associated with having a sense of distance or being away from the workplace, which is important for restoration. And this tended to be because interviewees talked about how different that sensory experience was to their indoor work environment. There was just a whole range of sensory stimuli that they wouldn't get inside. All right, and next, mind wandering was a really common form of engagement as well during these experiences. So just letting the mind drift and not being constrained by any particular task whilst on a work break. Often we do have tasks to do on a work break, but in this context of this study, people didn't have a task and mind wandering came to the fore pretty often. This was interesting in our study, as mind wandering was also associated with that sense of getting distance from the workplace, and again may have been due to that contrast between work environment and the break context. And the final forms of engagement related to that mindfulness frame that I mentioned, so either being accepting towards the experience in the face of potentially negative stimuli, like loud urban noises or a really crowded environment, contrasted with being negatively judgmental of those experiential stimuli. So examples of acceptance were individuals having fewer expectations of their experience and recognising the natural elements of their surroundings, creating some broader meaning of the human-nature relationship. Well, an example of negative judgment in these studies was individuals that felt they couldn't perceive or sense the natural elements in their space or sense beauty in nature around them because the setting was perhaps overly contrived or wrong in some way. So this gives a sense of the types of engagement that were common in experiences of urban green space in my studies. And identifying these allows us not only to understand how people are experiencing urban green space, but also the different factors that influence that engagement. And then importantly, how those forms of engagement or ways of attending might support wellbeing outcomes. So the second key outcome from my studies was that engagement interventions may be too effortful or disruptive to be beneficial for restoration primarily. So this outcome was mostly coming from my findings in the intervention study, where there are a few different groups, engagement groups and an unguided control group. And in this study, I found that the unguided control group, who had no engagement instructions, had the highest level of attention restoration or attention recovery after their nature experience. So we tested different groups. We tested all the groups on an attention task after the nature experience. And this graph here shows that the unguided group down the end had the lowest number of errors on that task. So they performed better. And this was significantly lower than one of the other engagement groups. And we found that across other metrics on this attention task, this similar or same finding was observed, where the unguided group had better attention performance. So interestingly, this finding with the unguided group wasn't found for other measures like mood and nature connection. So it might just be unique to attention or cognitive functioning. And we can try to explain this finding in a couple of ways. First, maybe having the phone that delivered instructions was disruptive to attention in the nature experience, and this has been found in another study. Second, maybe the instructions themselves were annoying or challenging to engage with, or purely having a task or an activity to do rather than letting an individual do what they needed to do was disruptive or effortful. So this finding has important implications for researchers or practitioners or individuals that want to use similar interventions or activities in nature. We need to think about what the outcomes are that we want to target. If it's the restoring of attention for people that are really drained during a workday, then perhaps instructions need to be delivered in really accessible forms without the use of distracting technology or redesigned altogether. And if nature connection is the desired outcome, then maybe these interventions can be beneficial if they're specifically designed to enhance nature connection rather than holistically nature outcomes. Alrighty, and the third main outcome or discussion point here is that I want to provide a bit of an overview of how mindfulness may function and benefit nature experiences and the outcomes of nature. So what I've done is identified a few mechanisms that link mindfulness to the pathways that lead to psychological restoration and nature connection. And that's represented with the figure on the slide here. So these mechanisms detail how applying mindfulness in nature might strengthen these outcomes, and it provides a bit of a framework to test the benefit of these aspects of mindfulness as well. So I'll just briefly go through the three mechanisms. So firstly, mindfulness in nature leads to a higher perceptual sensitivity, and this really comes back to that higher sensory engagement and embodied experience in nature. Second, decentering involves a step away from the subjective experience of nature, getting out of your own head, a bit of a detachment from self-identity, and therefore possibly a greater opportunity for identification with the external environment. And third, non-reactivity, or being able to accept the internal experience, so that's thoughts and feelings in the mind. This could strengthen these outcomes through the opportunity to accept any negative aspects of the experience or any preconceptions about a perceived relationship to nature. Interestingly, in my research, although perceptual sensitivity and decentering were generally associated with connection with nature and positive mood, the tendency to be noticing the internal experience was associated with lower mood. And this could be due to the inexperience of the individuals with mindfulness. So for those people being asked to notice the going-ons of the internal experience or their mind during that time, and not naturally being able to just accept that, may have actually been challenging and somewhat unpleasant. So we need to be aware of these limitations. Identifying these pathways and then testing their associations with outcomes tells us a bit about how to apply mindfulness in nature. For instance, it might be that focusing on the sensory aspects of mindfulness is more beneficial for people without mindfulness experience. So again, we need to know also who such interventions are being designed for. A more detailed overview of these pathways and the figure here can be followed up by anyone who's interested in the published paper. So that's the top one on this slide here. And I just wanted to point out this ongoing work in the published literature exploring the application of mindfulness in urban nature experiences. So that first one is our discussion about these pathways supporting restoration and nature connection. And then the City Mindful below is a commentary on our paper by a colleague in Sweden. And together they really aim to extend, along with broader literature, really aim to extend the application of mindfulness in nature. And they discuss some considerations around this effort, but also present some opportunities in the space, including the potential to connect the outcomes of mindfulness in nature to sustainable action and development. So yeah, if there's interest in this current dialogue, you can have a look at those papers as well. Alrighty, so just two main summary points to finish with. First, through this research and future research, we can test these interventions to heighten engagement and their subsequent outcomes. And throughout today's talk, I've highlighted some of the things that we should consider within the design and the delivery of them. And second, and what I'll finish on, is that engagement is a concept that represents a closer look at how connections with nature are formed. And it's important to understand as we're attempting to strengthen processes towards these outcomes. So I encourage everyone to consider the application of its use in your work, if it's a field that's applicable to you, or in your daily life, whether that looks like noticing how you're paying attention and how you're forming connection with nature, or setting aside some time to engage intentionally on your work breaks outside. And I'll just pop up some key references and acknowledge my supervisors who I've conducted this work with. And of course, feel free to reach out on email or Twitter there as well. And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Bravo, thanks so much, Rose. That's really a wonderful little journey through nature and nature connectedness. We do have some questions. I know I've been checking out some of those questions. Some of them are questions I also have. I think Andy will probably take us through, and some of them could be answered by either of our speakers, Andy, I guess. But would you like to lead us through the questions? Thanks.
Can do, Fern. Yeah, a lot of great questions coming through, and keep them coming. First one I'm going to direct towards Kate. This is around the incentives and barriers that we can provide to improve, get more green roofs in our cities. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts for the City of Melbourne? Oh, Kate, you're on mute, I think.
Okay, back?
Okay. Yep, you're good.
Great, thank you, Andy. Yeah, so really great question. And, you know, I think we're sort of at a point in the industry now, as you would have seen from one of the graphs that I put up, that we're starting to see this acceleration in the industry and, you know, a kind of critical mass in green roofs being constructed and designed. And so I think part of the story is around you know, having the right local evidence base. And so part of that is the unique climate here. And as one of the other comments or questions pointed out, just that our buildings are designed quite differently. So often in Europe, they're designed with, you know, snow weights. So there's kind of that higher weight loading. So we have to be really, I suppose, clever and inventive in the way that we can do this if we're putting it on existing buildings. And so when we asked contributors at our summits around this, there was a real push for regulations and standards and guidelines to help support the industry, ensure that what people are doing is best practice, and to support that kind of widespread diffusion and adoption, alongside building that evidence base that can kind of underline, support that. And then there were, you know, a range of other factors that are really important as well. And so there are some great papers that are looking at that here in Australia with the work we've done, but also internationally, there's some great case studies as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kate. I think that gives a lot of people some food for thought. Rose, I'm going to ask you a question about restoration. This person's asked, could the undirected group have got more of a beneficial outcome because they're fulfilling existing ways of engagement in nature and restoration pathways? So I think it's around they're more familiar with that style of nature engagement, and therefore they're getting a better benefit.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a really great question, and something I've been trying to tease apart in my analysis of what was going on during this study. How are the different groups engaging beyond the exercises they were given, and for that unguided group, how are they engaging generally? What I did measure was their level of engagement through mindfulness generally in the experience, which tells us a bit about emotional processes during the experience and attention. And I found that the unguided groups were engaging less with that internal experience, and perhaps therefore more with this external environmental, more sensory experience, which I think probably when you give people an opportunity to spend time outside without other tasks, like I said, we often go out on our work breaks, or we're passing through a park and other things are going on, right? We might be checking our emails on our phone or talking on the phone or whatever it is, or ducking to the shops. But when you give people that opportunity, I think there would be a tendency just to observe and be within that external environment quite naturally. And it's raised some thoughts for me about how to explore this further. What types of techniques can we use to explore engagement during the experience that isn't so post hoc, like asking them what they did afterwards? How can we actually explore that at the time without being too disruptive to the experience? So yeah, I'll certainly be looking to explore this further in the future, and I think it's a great research effort for future work.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rose. I look forward to your next study using smartwatches to understand people's connection with nature. Kate, I've got a question for you around the role of Gardens for Wildlife. This person's highlighted that a lot of those programs adopted by local governments are really reporting that social wellbeing and connection to nature is a good outcome. What do you think the role of Gardens for Wildlife might be in the future of people and cities?
Oh. Yeah, I mean, great question. I think there is such an opportunity for incorporating nature in our lives in so many different ways. And so, gardening at home is a great way to do that. There's evidence around the role of gardening in the literature. And as this person says here, just the importance that can play in people's lives. I guess the question is, not everybody has access to gardens. But there is evidence that for people who do have access to their own gardens, that this can provide a really important role and complement public access to public green spaces as well. There's also been some longitudinal research over several years that's explored the role of nature at home, at work, and in different kinds of experiences, and that identified that the gardening at home and these really active kind of interventions were quite important for influencing longer term wellbeing trajectories. So yeah, all that is to say, I think gardening is one important piece of the puzzle, however you can do that.
Thanks so much, Kate. Yeah. I know we're just on 2 o'clock, but I'm going to ask one more question. So sorry, Fern, if you've got a 2 o'clock meeting. This question is around, and it's for either Rose or Kate. Does it matter what type of nature you're engaging in? Can it be agriculture? Can it be community gardens? Can it be anything for us to connect and engage with nature? Who would like to answer that one?
Rose, would you like to take it?
Sure, I can start us off and then you can chime in, Kate.
Sure.
There's quite a bit of research that explores the environmental characteristics that generally people have preferences for and can be restored to a high degree in, but preferences differ as well, and that can be shaped by cultural factors, social factors, where we've grown up and what we're attracted to. And if you have a higher preference for a certain environment, the opportunities to be restored by or connect with that environment are also greater. So I'll just kind of say that short piece. Do you have anything to add, Kate?
I guess I would just add to that sort of a future looking piece around, where the research might go. And so that's really acknowledging that a lot of the work so far has been done in the global north. And so there's a lot more work to be done to understand, the diversity of experiences with the natural environment.
Thank you both. Look, we could talk all afternoon and probably longer, learn all of the questions that are there. There's some terrific questions. And even on that last one, we could keep talking about the need to expand research in all kinds of other ways. So thank you so much to both Kate and Rose for your presentations today. Really thought-provoking, really interesting, and really important as we progress into the future, really. Thanks also to Andy for doing all the tech. Thanks to everybody who asked questions. If you missed the start or anything like that of today's seminar, the recording will be up on the ARI website in a few days. So jump back there and watch from the start, or share it with your friends that you think might be interested in it. I think our next seminar is on the 16th of May, but if you're subscribed, you'll get that news in your email inbox. In the meantime, take care, spend some time in nature. Go and listen, watch, feel it, smell it, enjoy nature, and encourage everyone around you to do the same. And we'll see you again at the next ARI seminar. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much. Bye.